Hey, awesome students. Today we're going to talk about how we can support all learners in our classroom. It can be difficult when we've got so many students in there and we want to give everybody the attention they need and deserve. So we're going to talk about what it means to have inclusive classrooms and what it means to have multi-tiered systems of support to help us in that endeavor. So students, particularly those with disabilities, tend to fall behind in the classroom. And we talked about in our last session about how these students are more likely to drop out of school. They can also be bullied in school because they are different. And so a solid education foundation depends on high quality education for all students. Those, it doesn't matter if they have disabilities, talents, giftedness, or they're just your average child. They all deserve to have high quality education. And we do that through something that's called evidence-based practices. And one of those evidence-based practices is what we call school-wide systems of support. And some of these systems will address emotional and behavioral issues. Some will address academic issues. And so teachers are trained in these different supports, and they need that knowledge and the skills so they can implement them in the classroom and implement them with fidelity, meaning you're using the same procedures that the researchers use to develop them, using them consistently. And teachers need to really rely on these evidence-based practices. And they have been proven that they're effective, not just by somebody's whim or somebody's great idea, but by rigorous research that tests and has data that backs it up and shows that these systems really do work. Because a lot of teachers, they just use what they like. And sometimes what you like doesn't really work in the classroom. And so using these evidence-based practices is always a best strategy to use. But if you use them, is that enough? Well, the thing is, your students are going to have a wide range of abilities and disabilities and characteristics. Some are going to be English language learners. Some are going to be gifted. Some are going to be very passive, quiet learners. Others will talk your ear off all class and then some. Some are going to have great vocabularies and comprehension skills, while others are going to struggle. And so what we did is we teach you what's called Universal Design for Learning, abbreviated UDL. And the purpose of this is to eliminate barriers to students learning. And policymakers across the United States have endorsed Universal Design for Learning in key federal legislation. But what is it? There are three principles. And so the three principles include multiple means of representation. So in other words, the way the content is provided. And principle 2, provide multiple means of action and expression. So the way students demonstrate what they have learned. And then principle 3, provide multiple means of engagement. So this is students are motivated by or interested in their learning, so why they are learning. Oftentimes we think of Universal Design for Learning as in the modality, so kinesthetic, auditory, visual. So the way you're representing means and information and how students are taking in those in a different way. So Universal Design for Learning is a proactive measure. It's something you plan for in advance in your lesson. It doesn't just necessarily automatically happen when you're teaching. You've already planned for this as part of your lesson. And then we've got what's called differentiated instruction. This is a responsive measure. And this is also incorporated when implementing and planning instruction, but you're looking at specific characteristics of students and what's required as part of an IEP or a 504. And so when you're looking at differentiated instruction, you can differentiate technically in 4 ways. You can differentiate the curriculum, you can differentiate the instruction, or you can differentiate the assessment. And we tend to call these content, process, and product in the class. And that's how you'll hear them referred to from this point out. The last piece you can differentiate is also the environment, so the where of the learning that takes place. So this can be done as adaptations to students' interests, their needs, and it's just to make sure that we are keeping them engaged and ready to learn. So how are you going to use data? How do you know what your students need? And we use that data. We're gathering the data all the time through different types of assessments. Oftentimes when I say assessment, brains automatically go to, ooh, a test. And yes, a test is a type of assessment, but there's many different types. You can write papers, you can have question answer sessions, you can do a project, you can create just about anything. And so you're collecting data from all of these. Sometimes it's a diagnostic where you find out what students know before you begin teaching, because you can identify individual strengths and weaknesses. It helps you pace the students to where they are. Then you have formative assessment, and this takes place during the instruction. The point of formative assessment is to know how your students are responding to your instruction, and then you as the teacher alter your instruction to make sure the students are learning. So formative assessment really informs how you are instructing the student. And then we've got what's called summative assessments, and sometimes they're conducted after the instruction. And summative, this shows what the students have mastered, what the students learned. It's a summary of the student learning, and this is most often what is utilized for grades. But the big difference between formative and summative is how the data is used. In formative, it's used to change you as a teacher and your teaching strategies, and summative, the data is used to show what the students have learned and what they have accomplished. So how can teachers know, though, if students are actually responding and growing? What we do is what's called progress monitoring, and this is a formative assessment. So this is informing how you're going to change your teaching. So you can use short tests or probes, are sometimes called, to see if students are learning the skills and the content. And then you have what's called mastery measurement, and this evaluates student achievement on a specific skill or skill set in the current instructional content. You can also have something called curriculum-based measurements or general outcome measurements. And this is the sampling of skill in one academic domain that goes across the entire year to show the students growing that area. Now, response to intervention has multi-tiered systems. Sometimes they're called multi-tiered systems of support. Locally, we're going to call them RTI, response to intervention. And these are going to increase in intensity. The higher the tier, the more intense the assistance for the student's going to be. So first off, you simply identify, you give a probe across to all students to see where they're starting with. And this helps identify students who need extra academic supports. So students who are in Tier 1, they're getting primary instruction, and this is more prevention. It's high quality instruction for all students, our idea of universal design for learning. When students move to Tier 2, they get additional supports that are sort of moderate intensity. And we only move students up when we know that they have not been making progress on Tier 1. And how do we know that? By collecting the data. And we're going to look into more of that on your first project, which is going to be looking at response to intervention and monitoring student progress. And then Tier 3, this is our third, our highest, our most intensive level. This is individualized interventions for students. And these are the students who, the Tier 1 and Tier 2, they're just not responding to the intervention strategies in there. And again, we know this because we've been collecting data. And so we move them to Tier 3. So how does it work? So you identify the struggling learners, you get these increasing levels of intensity. You as the teacher, you're monitoring student progress, and it starts with that whole, as I said before, universal screening at the beginning of the year to identify students who may be at risk. And all students in your classroom are going to be on that Tier 1 high quality general education instruction. About 10 to 15% of your students are going to have to move up to that Tier 2, that secondary, that moderate intervention, and only about 5% are going to need that Tier 3, the really one-on-one. We're going to take a look at a couple of scenarios here, and I want you to think about whether it's a Tier 1 or Tier 2 or 3, and then we're going to go over the rationale for why the answer is what it is. So Carlos is a 4th grade student in Mr. Wilson's classroom. He's exceptionally bright, but he's also an ELL, English language learner. He struggles sometimes with oral directions, but even more so with writing. Mr. Wilson has decided to begin cooperative learning groups in his classroom. and partners Carlos with 2 students who have high English proficiency and reading and writing skills. In the cooperative groups, they work on developing a topic sentence and ideas to support it. So think about it a second, looking at those tiers, tiers 1, 2, and 3. What tier do you think Carlos is in? If you said tier 1, you are right. High quality instruction to all students. And the way we can do that, pulling that from that scenario, we can see Mr. Wilson has decided to begin cooperative learning groups in his classroom. So this is for all students. This is a great learning strategy for students, these cooperative groups. So he's providing this for the entire classroom, Carlos included. As part of this grouping strategy, when you group students, you do it proactively in a manner that's going to partner strengths so that the groups have the strongs and the weaks helping to support each other. In this case, he's being strategically partnered with 2 students who have a high English proficiency and reading skills. And notice that in the group, they're not helping him do the work. They're all working together, which is another classroom strategy for tier 1. That's just good universal design for learning right there. Our next scenario, Marshall is an 11-year-old middle school student. He loves reading, language arts, and history, but he's struggling in his math class with Mrs. Dwight. He has difficulty with recalling the answers for basic addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. However, his higher-level thinking skills in math application are stellar. Mrs. Smith has even tried review games and group work and has even modified some assignments for him. She has spoken with Marshall, and they agreed to try Delta Math. Each night, Marshall will have that for homework, and they agreed he would attempt to achieve 80% accuracy. So what do you think? Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3? Marshall is a Tier 3. He's getting intensive individualized interventions because those secondary supports are not enough. So let's see how we came to that conclusion. So Mrs. Dwight has tried review games and group work. So that's Tier 1. That's whole class modified assignments for him. Now we're going up to Tier 2, doing some more intervention. Now it's going to be one-on-one, individualized, because he's starting Delta Math, which is a program that is interacting with him on the computer, trying that intense intervention. Let's take a look at a last one. Gabe is a 17-year-old junior in high school. He struggles with reading comprehension, and this is causing difficulty in his science class, which he loves. His teacher has begun partnering him with another student who has excellent reading comprehension skills to work with Gabe during their labs. This student reads the directions aloud for Gabe, and then they complete the assignments together. So what do you think? Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3? Gabe is a Tier 2. He's getting additional supports of moderate intensity. So you can see here, his teacher has begun partnering him with another student. So we're not talking group work. We're looking at now he's getting a buddy, and this buddy is going to read the directions aloud for Gabe, providing that additional support he needs beyond what is being given in the regular classroom. And then they will complete the assignment together. So the differences can be subtle, but the biggest key is Tier 1 is whole class. Tier 2, you're getting some moderate intensity interventions, in this case, a partner who's reading the information to them, versus Tier 3, they're doing intensive one-on-one. Now, this is also present in behavioral systems, so positive behavior interventions and support, PBIS it's called. This is a multi-tiered for behavior management in the classroom. And in PBIS, all students on the same level of tiers as RTI are going to receive specific instruction on behavioral expectations, because the whole key is to prevent problems before they even start. And so Tier 1 is primary prevention. So you want to prevent problem behaviors by teaching students the expectations that are required in the school setting. And don't get nervous thinking about all these different tiers. Tier 1, what you're going to be doing normally is going to be effective 80% of the time. That's good to hold on to. Tier 2, this is targeted interventions for small groups of students who need extra support in understanding those behaviors. And this is only required of about 15% of students. And finally, Tier 3. Tier 3, we really want to figure out what's going on. We want to identify the reason for the behavior and develop plans to address the unwanted behavior. And again, these numbers, it's only about 5% of your students. So this is not something you're going to be focusing all your time on. The primary goal is preventative by providing that good instruction, whether it is educational or behavior, for your entire classroom.